The saloon was dead silent, not the kind of quiet between songs, but the kind of quiet that follows a gunshot. Because in the middle of the smoky room, a man named Doyle had just thrown his entire life onto the poker table. And his life wasn't a stack of gold coins. It was a woman. Her name was Clara, and her hands rested on a swollen, pregnant belly. Doyle, a man who smelled of sour whiskey and pure desperation, yanked her forward by the arm. "I'll wager her," he snarled to the table of stunned men. "Win the pot, and she's yours. Her and the brat she's carrying." The men in that room were hard men, used to seeing hard things. But this was different. Some of them laughed, a nervous, ugly sound that died in their throats. Others just stared, their poker cards completely forgotten. This wasn't a game anymore. It was a damn spectacle. To Doyle, Clara wasn't a person. She was a burden, a debt he could cash in, a final, desperate play. But at the far end of the table, one man sat perfectly still. His name was Elias Hart, a quiet rancher, a man whose face was a roadmap of loneliness. His wife had passed 5 years back, and since then, the only thing that spoke on his ranch was the wind howling through the empty rooms. He had no children, no family, just ghosts and dust for company. When Doyle shoved Clara into the center of everyone's attention, Elias finally looked up, and he didn't see a prize. He didn't see a wager. He saw the same storm in her terrified eyes that he felt in his own soul. The game continued, but the air was different now. It was thick with shame and tension. Every card that hit the scarred wooden table was like a hammer blow, counting down to the end of this woman's life, as she knew it. Doyle was grinning, cocky, sweating with a gambler's fever, absolutely certain he had the winning hand. Then Elias slowly, deliberately, laid down his cards. A straight flush. The saloon exploded into a roar of shouts and curses. Doyle slammed his fist on the table, his face turning purple with rage. But a deal was a deal. He'd lost. Clara was now the property of Elias Hart. Every eye in the room turned to the quiet rancher. They expected him to grab her, to gloat, to drag his new prize out into the night like a sack of flour. That's what a man like Doyle would have done. But Elias didn't do that. He stood up slow, his tall frame unfolding from the chair. He took off his worn, dusty hat and placed it gently on the table. Then he looked right at Clara, not as an object he had won, but as a human being he had found. And in a voice softer than anyone in that saloon had ever heard, he said, "Ma'am, you don't belong in any man's game, but if you'll allow me, I'll see you to safety." The whiskey stopped pouring. The nervous laughter died for good. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Clara, a woman who had been treated like property, like dirt, like nothing, looked up. Her wide, frightened eyes filled with tears. This man wasn't claiming a victory. He was offering a rescue. She was so broken she could only nod. Elias didn't grab her arm. He offered his hand. Not to take, but to guide. And when her trembling fingers finally touched his, the entire town of Copper Ridge felt a shift in the wind. They knew this single, strange night was going to change everything. But they had no idea just how much, or that the real dangerous game was only just beginning. Word of what happened at the saloon spread faster than a prairie fire. By sunup, every single soul in Copper Ridge was talking about it. The lonely rancher, Elias Hart, had won a pregnant woman in a poker game. But the story they told wasn't one of shame or scandal. It was one of pure, dumbfounded wonder. Life on the Hart Ranch was quiet. It was different. Elias gave Clara her own room. It was a simple, clean space with a sturdy bed and a window that looked out over the endless, rolling fields. He never asked for a thing. He never demanded anything. He just cooked her meals, chopped her wood, and made sure she was warm. It was like he was building a wall of kindness around her, brick by quiet brick. And when her time finally came, on a night when a blizzard was screaming outside like a demon, he didn't hesitate. He rode for miles through the blinding, freezing snow just to fetch the town doctor. He never left her side through the whole ordeal. Through hours of agonizing pain, he was there, holding her hand, his quiet strength a lifeline in the storm of childbirth. And then, a new sound filled the lonely, silent ranch house, the cry of a baby boy. Elias looked at the tiny, wrinkled child, and everyone in that room saw the ice that had frozen his heart for 5 long years finally begin to crack. The doctor, a weary but kind man, placed the baby in Clara's arms. She was exhausted, pale, but her eyes were clear and fiercely alive. She looked not at the baby, but at Elias. Her voice was barely a whisper. "He can't have Doyle's name," she said, her voice breaking. "He just can't." She took a shaky breath, gathering her strength for what she was about to say next. "He should have yours." Elias froze. His own chance at being a father, at having a family, had been buried in the cold ground with his wife. He thought that door in his life was closed and locked forever. But now, here was a child, a new life, a tiny, perfect boy, looking up at him as if he was the sun, the moon, and the entire world. From that day forward, the baby was known as Samuel Elias Hart. The lonely rancher was lonely no more. He had a son to carry on his shoulders, and a woman at his dinner table. The quiet, dusty house wasn't just a building anymore. It was slowly, miraculously, becoming a home. But you have to remember, shadows have a way of stretching long in the west. And the shadow of a man like Doyle doesn't just disappear with the morning sun. Doyle was a snake, coiled in the dusty corner of the saloon, and snakes don't forget. They wait. He watched from the shadows, drinking himself into a bitter, simmering rage. Every time someone in town whispered the name Elias Hart, every time they mentioned him playing father to his son, the venom churned hotter in his gut. One evening, just as Elias was closing up the big barn doors for the night, he heard the frantic thunder of hooves. Doyle rode hard into the yard, his eyes wild and bloodshot, his horse kicking up dust. "You think you can just take what's mine, Hart?" he spat, his hand resting menacingly on the pistol at his hip. "That woman, she carries my seed. That boy, he's my blood. You're living a lie, and you're going to pay for it." Elias stood his ground, as calm and unmovable as a mountain. "You didn't have a right to them when you threw them on a poker table, Doyle. You sure as hell have no right to them now." Doyle leaned far down from his saddle, his voice a low, threatening growl. "This ain't over. Not by a long shot. I'll be back for what belongs to me. And neither you nor that shotgun of yours is gonna stop me." He wheeled his horse around and vanished back into the twilight, leaving a cloud of dust and palpable dread hanging in the air. Inside the small ranch house, Clara had heard every single word. She clutched baby Samuel, her body trembling with a familiar cold fear. "He'll do it, Elias," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "He won't stop. He'll come for us." Elias came inside and put a steady, warm hand on her shoulder. "Let him come," he said, and his voice was as hard as iron. "He's about to find out this house is harder to break than he thinks." The ranch became their fortress, a haven of hope in a dangerous world. Slowly, day by day, Clara started to heal. She even started to laugh. Her smile, when it came, was like the sun finally breaking through after a long, hard winter. She and Elias worked side by side, a quiet, unspoken rhythm forming between them. The ghosts that had haunted the lonely corners of the house were finally starting to fade away. But peace, especially on the frontier, is a fragile, easily broken thing. One night there was a knock on the door. It wasn't a friendly knock from a neighbor. It was hard and official. Sheriff Alden stood on the porch, his weathered face grim in the lantern light. "Elias," he said, taking off his hat as a sign of respect. "We've got a problem. Doyle's been causing a ruckus in town, more than usual. He's filed a formal complaint, says you stole his property." Clara stepped forward, her face turning as white as a sheet. "Sheriff, that's not true. He wagered us. He threw us away like we were nothing." The sheriff sighed, his eyes full of a weary pity. "I know that, ma'am, and you know that. But the law? Well, the law is a funny, complicated thing. That poker game wasn't sanctioned by any official authority. which means technically, no property can legally change hands in a game like that. He looked from Elias's stony face to Clara's terrified one. He's claiming you're holding his family against their will. He's demanding full legal custody of the boy. A cold, heavy dread filled the warm little kitchen. Elias's jaw tightened until the muscle jumped. So the law protects a man who sells his family, but not the man who saved them? The law, the sheriff said quietly, protects what's written on a piece of paper. And on paper, Elias, you have no legal claim to that boy. Doyle does. The words hung in the air, heavier and colder than a tombstone. They had built a family on kindness, on decency, on a second chance at life. But a single piece of paper, signed by a distant judge who didn't know their story, could tear it all apart in a single heartbeat. And a man like Doyle wasn't going to wait for a judge. 3 nights later, the blizzard returned with a vengeance. The wind howled outside the small ranch house like a banshee, rattling the window panes and clawing at the door. Inside, Clara was humming a soft lullaby to Samuel, the gentle sound a tiny, fragile shield against the raging storm. Suddenly, the front door didn't just open. It exploded inward, splintering off its leather hinges and crashing to the floor. Doyle stood there in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the swirling snow. He was flanked by 2 rough-looking men he'd hired from the saloon. They were all drunk, and their eyes held a cruel, predatory light. "The party's over, Clara," Doyle roared, his words slurring together as he stumbled into the room. "Pack your things! You and the brat are coming home with me! Now!" Clara screamed, scrambling backward on the floor, holding Samuel so tight against her chest that the baby began to cry. Elias appeared from the kitchen, a long-barreled shotgun in his hands. He didn't raise it to fire, he just held it. His calm, menacing presence was enough to make the 2 hired men hesitate by the broken door. "Get out of my house, Doyle," Elias said, and his voice was a low, dangerous rumble. Doyle just laughed, a ragged, ugly sound that cut through the wind. "Your house? This ain't your house. That ain't your woman. And that sure as hell ain't your son." He took another stumbling step forward. "She belongs with me. The law says so." And that's when Clara found her voice. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a plea. It was a blade of pure steel. "No," she said, her voice shaking with a righteous fury that stunned everyone in the room, including Elias. "I was never yours. You starved me. You hit me. You threw me away like I was garbage. This man," she gestured with her head toward Elias, "gave me a home. He gave my son a name. Samuel will call him Pa, long after the world has forgotten you even existed." The room went dead silent, save for the howling wind and the baby's frightened cries. Doyle's face twisted into a mask of pure, murderous hatred. He lunged, but just as Elias finally raised the shotgun, another figure filled the broken doorway. It was Sheriff Alden. "That's enough, Doyle," the sheriff commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. Doyle spun around, snarling like a cornered animal. "Stay out of this, Alden. This is family business." "It became my business the second you kicked in this door," the sheriff said, stepping inside, the cold snow swirling around his boots. He wasn't looking at Doyle. He was looking at Clara, at the terrified baby in her arms. Then he turned his tired eyes to Elias, and his next words dropped like a stone into a deep, dark well. "Elias, I'm sorry. I have a warrant. The circuit judge signed it this afternoon." He held up a folded piece of official paper. "By law, the boy, Samuel, is to be placed immediately in the custody of his biological father until a formal hearing can be arranged." The shotgun in Elias's hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. It was useless. Clara let out a sound of pure agony, a mother's worst nightmare coming to life right before her eyes. Doyle's grin was triumphant, evil, and absolute. "The law's on my side now, Hart. So why don't you be a good boy and hand over my son?" The sheriff looked torn, a good man forced to do a terrible thing, but his duty was clear. He drew his pistol, not pointing it at anyone, but holding it ready at his side. Elias, don't make this any harder than it already has to be. They were trapped. The law, the very thing that was supposed to protect the innocent, was being twisted and used as a weapon against them. Elias could fight, but that would make him an outlaw, a fugitive. He could give in and lose the only thing in the world he had left to live for. But then, something happened that no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted. Clara, with hot tears streaming down her face, looked the sheriff dead in the eye. "You can't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the sheriff said gently. "The law is the law." "No," she said, and her voice suddenly gained a strange new strength. "You don't understand. You can't give the baby to Doyle." She took a deep, shuddering breath, and the secret she had guarded so closely, the secret she had held in her heart for almost a year, finally broke free. "Because he's not the father." The wind outside seemed to stop mid-howl. Every single man in that room froze, caught in a tableau of disbelief. Doyle's sick, triumphant grin vanished from his face, replaced by a look of pure, dumbfounded confusion. Sheriff Alden lowered his pistol just a few inches. "What did you just say, ma'am?" "He's not the father," Clara repeated, and this time her voice rang with a desperate, undeniable truth. She clutched Samuel to her chest as if he were a shield. "Doyle is not his father!" Doyle lurched forward, his face turning a dark, blotchy red with rage. "She's lying! Of course I'm the father! Look at him! She's a filthy liar!" But no one was looking at Doyle anymore. They were all looking at the baby in Clara's arms. They looked at his tuft of dark, fine hair, at his wide, serious eyes. Elias had never really thought about it before. He had accepted the boy, no questions asked, because that's what the boy needed. But now he looked, and he saw nothing of the cruel, narrow-faced man snarling and spitting in his doorway. The sheriff's gaze flickered between Doyle and the child. He'd seen enough family squabbles, enough lies and deceits, to know the sound of a desperate bluff. And Clara's voice, it didn't sound like a bluff. It sounded like a confession. "If Doyle ain't the father," the sheriff asked slowly, the gears turning in his mind, "then who is?" Clara's eyes darted to Elias, just for a fraction of a second. It was a silent apology for the hurricane she was about to unleash in his quiet, orderly life. Then she looked back at the sheriff. Her chin was high. The fear was finally gone, burned away and replaced by a fierce, protective fire that warmed the entire room. "His father was a good man," she said, her voice trembling but clear as a bell. "A kind man that I met long before Doyle ever laid a hand on me. He was a traveler. He didn't know about the baby. He was gone before I even knew for sure myself." Doyle exploded with fury. "She's making it all up. She was with me for a year. She's mine." "He kept me locked up," Clara shot back, her words hitting him like bullets. "He told everyone I was his, but he found me after I was already carrying this child. He thought he could claim me, claim my son, like a piece of property, but my son is not his." In that single instant, the entire story shifted on its axis. This was never about a poker debt. It was about a lie. A long, ugly, suffocating lie that Doyle had been telling the whole town to cover up his own pathetic cruelty. The warrant in the sheriff's hand was now a worthless piece of paper. It was based entirely on the fraudulent claim that Doyle was the biological father. The sheriff turned his full attention to Doyle, his eyes as hard and cold as flint. "You want to explain this, Doyle? Did you lie to a circuit judge? Because that's a serious, serious crime." Doyle's beady eyes darted around the room, frantically trying to find a way out of the corner he was now trapped in. The two thugs he'd brought with him were already backing slowly toward the broken door, wanting no part of whatever was about to happen next. "She's a crazy lying," he started to snarl, but he never got to finish the sentence. Because Elias, who had been completely silent through it all, finally moved. He didn't raise the shotgun. Instead, he set it carefully and quietly against the wall. Then he walked forward until he was standing toe to toe with Doyle, so close their chests were almost touching. The lonely rancher, the man of few words, looked down at the bully who had tried to ruin 3 innocent lives, and he said something that was more terrifying than any threat could ever be. "I believe her!" Doyle saw the look in Elias's eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, something deeper. It was justice. He panicked. He shoved Elias back hard and scrambled to draw the pistol from his belt. But the sheriff was faster. The heavy butt of his Colt revolver came down hard on Doyle's wrist. There was a sickening crack. The gun clattered uselessly to the floorboards. Doyle howled in pain, clutching his broken arm. "It's over, Doyle," the sheriff said, pulling out a pair of iron handcuffs. "You're under arrest for assault, for breaking and entering, and for committing perjury before a court of law." As the sheriff dragged the struggling, cursing Doyle out into the raging storm, Clara finally collapsed into a wooden chair, sobbing with a year's worth of pent-up relief. Elias knelt beside her. He reached out and gently, tenderly touched the baby's cheek. Samuel, miraculously, had fallen asleep, safe from the storm both inside and outside the house. The little ranch house was quiet again. The threat was gone. It felt like the end of the story, but the biggest secret of all was still buried, and its discovery would shake the very foundations of Copper Ridge. The next morning, the snow had stopped. The world outside was clean and white and beautifully, peacefully quiet. Sheriff Alden rode out to the ranch early. He wasn't there as a lawman this time. He was there as a man with questions that needed answers. He sat at the small kitchen table, nursing a cup of hot black coffee. Clara sat across from him, looking exhausted, but, for the first time, truly at peace. Elias stood by the hearth, watching them both, a silent guardian. "Clara," the sheriff said gently, "what you did last night, that took a kind of courage I don't see very often. But for this to be well and truly over, I need to know the truth. All of it." Clara nodded. She took a deep breath and began to tell her real story. She wasn't some fallen woman Doyle had picked up in a saloon. Her family had been farmers, good people, headed west on the Oregon Trail to build a new life. A terrible fever had taken her parents, leaving her orphaned and alone at a remote trading post. And that's where she met him, the traveler, the baby's real father. His name was Thomas. He was a surveyor for the railroad, mapping the new territories. He was kind, he was handsome, and he was gentle. They had fallen in love and planned to marry. But he was called away on an urgent assignment into the mountains, promising to return for her in the spring. He never came back. And that's when Doyle found her. Alone, grieving, and just starting to realize she was with child. He saw an opportunity. He was a predator. He isolated her, controlled her, and told everyone in the territory that she was his woman. It was easier and safer to go along with the lie than to fight him. She was exhausted and had a baby to protect. The sheriff listened to the entire story without saying a word. When she was finished, he just nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "And Thomas?" he finally asked. "You never heard from him again?" "No," she whispered, her heart aching with the old pain. I assumed he had forgotten me. Or worse." A strange, haunted look passed over the sheriff's face. "What was his last name, Clara?" "Sinclair," she said. "His name was Thomas Sinclair." The coffee cup in the sheriff's hand trembled, rattling against the saucer. He put it down on the table with a soft, deliberate click. He looked at Elias, who still stood by the fire like a statue, then back to Clara. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was suddenly thick with an emotion she couldn't place. "Thomas Sinclair, he didn't abandon you." Clara's heart leaped into her throat. "What do you mean?" "About 6 months back, a survey team was ambushed by bandits up in the Black Hills. It was a bad one. Only one man survived. His partner. His partner was killed in the attack." The sheriff leaned forward, his eyes full of a deep and terrible sorrow. "His partner's name was Thomas Sinclair." Clara gasped. a hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. All this time she had thought he had left her, but he hadn't left. He had been taken from her, but the sheriff wasn't finished. The final shocking twist of the knife was still coming. The man who survived that ambush, the sheriff continued, his eyes now locked on Elias. The one who brought Sinclair's body back down from those hills. The one who buried his friend and swore on his grave that he'd find the woman Thomas was always talking about. The one he promised Sinclair he would look after no matter what. Silence. A heavy, profound silence filled the small kitchen. Elias hadn't moved a single muscle. He just stood by the fire, his face like carved stone, his eyes filled with a grief that was 5 years, and now a lifetime, deep. Clara slowly, so slowly, turned her head to look at him. Her mind was spinning, desperately trying to put the impossible pieces together. The poker game, the quiet rancher who just happened to be there that night. The way he had looked at her not as a prize, but as a person to be protected. The way he had accepted her son, his friend's son, without a single question. It wasn't a coincidence. It was never a coincidence. Elias, she whispered, her voice full of disbelief and a dawning incredible wonder. Elias finally met her gaze. The sorrow that had clung to him for so long was still there. But now she understood it. It wasn't just for his wife anymore. It was for his best friend. His last words were your name, Clara, Elias said, his voice rough with an emotion he could no longer contain. He made me promise I'd find you. I came to Copper Ridge looking for you. I was asking around, and then I heard Doyle in the saloon, bragging about his pregnant woman. He took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. I knew I couldn't just challenge him. He was dangerous. He would have hurt you. The poker game. It was the only way I could think of to get you away from him for good. To win you, so that I could finally set you free. The whole unbelievable story, the whole impossible chain of events, clicked perfectly into place. This quiet, lonely rancher wasn't just a random savior who had appeared out of nowhere. He was the keeper of a sacred promise. He had been protecting her and her son, his best friend's son, from the very beginning. The family born of a shocking poker game was actually a family born of a dying wish, a love that had reached across the veil of death and the harshness of the frontier to bring them all together. Clara looked from the honorable, heartbroken man standing before her to the baby sleeping peacefully in his cradle, the son of the man she had loved and lost. And she realized her long, painful journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. The weight of all those secrets now revealed settled over the Hart Ranch, not like a storm, but like a gentle cleansing snow. What began as a story of random chance and a desperate rescue was now, undeniably, a story of destiny and unbreakable purpose. Elias wasn't just a kind stranger. He was a guardian angel, sent by a love that was lost but would never be forgotten. He had carried the heavy burden of his promise in complete silence, never wanting to burden Clara with more grief while she was still trapped under Doyle's thumb. He had planned to tell her everything, one day when she was safe, when she was strong, when she was finally ready to hear it. The poker game wasn't a gamble. It was a calculated, high-stakes rescue mission. The true story spread through Copper Ridge, carried on the crisp winter wind. The tale of Doyle's utter cruelty, Clara's tragic past, and Elias's quiet, unwavering loyalty changed the way the town saw everything. They weren't just a strange, makeshift family on the edge of town anymore. They were a living, breathing testament to honor and courage. Doyle was sentenced by the circuit judge to 10 years of hard labor, not just for his crimes against Elias and Clara, but for lying to the court and for a whole string of other brutalities that people, now feeling brave, were finally coming forward to report. His dark shadow was finally gone from their lives for good. Spring came to the valley. The snow melted, the fields turned a vibrant green, and the little ranch house on the hill felt lighter, warmer, and filled with a quiet joy. The sound of a baby's laughter now mixed with the sound of the wind. Samuel was growing into a happy, healthy boy with his father's kind eyes and his mother's resilient, unbreakable spirit. Elias taught him how to pat the horses' strong necks. Clara sang him the soft lullabies her own mother had once sung to her. And together, the three of them were building a new life on the solid foundation of an old, sacred promise. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains in a spectacular blaze of orange and purple, Elias and Clara stood on the porch, watching little Samuel take his first wobbly, triumphant steps in the soft grass of the yard. Thomas would have been so proud of him, Clara said softly, a sad but sweet smile on her face. Elias nodded, his own smile touched with a bittersweet memory. He would have. He was a good man. A comfortable, easy silence settled between them, the kind that can only exist between two people who have walked through the same fire and come out the other side. "Thank you, Elias," Clara said, turning to face him, her eyes shining in the twilight. "For everything. You honored your friend. You saved his son. You saved me." "I just kept a promise," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You did more than that," she replied, her gaze steady and full of a new emotion. "You gave us a home. You gave us a future. You gave us a family." She reached out and took his weathered, calloused hand in hers. It felt strong and certain and safe. It felt like coming home. "Maybe," she said, her voice barely a whisper on the evening breeze, "we can be a family. For real." Elias looked down at their joined hands, then up into her hopeful eyes. The crushing loneliness that had been his constant companion for 5 long years was gone. In its place was a warmth he thought he'd never feel again, a hope for a future he had never, ever dared to dream of for himself. He didn't need to say a word. His smile was answer enough. The lonely rancher, the grieving mother, and the son of a fallen hero. They were a strange and beautiful family, forged in the fire of a saloon, tested by a heartless villain, and bound together by a love that proved to be stronger than death itself. The town of Copper Ridge, which had once laughed at the sheer absurdity of it all, now looked at the little heart ranch on the hill with something that felt a lot like reverence. They knew they were witnessing something rare and precious. Not just the birth of a new family, but the quiet, certain triumph of goodness in a hard, unforgiving land. And they knew, with an absolute certainty, that this was only the beginning of their incredible story. What started with a single card hitting a table ended up changing an entire town, proving that the best hands in life aren't always the ones you're dealt, but the ones you choose to play with courage, honor, and a whole lot of heart. If you were moved by Elias and Clara's story of unexpected love and loyalty, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales that prove hope can be found in the most unlikely of places.